Welcome today, Scott, and thank you so much for being a part of the Veterans Summit. And this is a topic of sexual harassment and assault in the military. It's a tough topic, and you have done a great deal to alleviate this problem, to educate on this problem. And let's start with your feelings, your passion for this, and why you are so passionate about this message getting out.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. I'm really happy to be here and applaud what you all are doing on the topic to advocate and support military members, veterans, their families. There's such a broad spectrum of people who are influenced by this. Either those who are, have been afflicted by it as survivors themselves, but also their family members and their broader connections to that. Why am I so concerned about this, and why have I committed so much of my time? I served for 27 years in the Marine Corps, and I had extensive responsibilities with the young men and women who sign a blank check on a dotted line to serve our country. And I've always been someone who, it's all personal to me, everything that I do. And as I led formations of people, and it became more apparent to me what the challenges were and what young people and old people were going through and had suffered through, I didn't want to be part of the problem. I wanted to be part of the solution. It was impossible for me to look at the formations of my Marines and sailors and others as I served and had responsibility to look at those people, knowing that there, in many cases and in numbers that were unacceptable, was an underlying cancer, or however you want to term it, that was occurring within the ranks. And it's a silent killer of morale, of people in many cases. If it follows out to a trauma that some people are unable to contend with and don't have the support. And then, frankly, as a national security expert and someone who is responsible for large formations, it was also something that's not only inconsistent with what our nation stands for, but it was a risk to our national security. It was creating challenges to our readiness within our ranks, and still is. And so I just felt like I could not stand by and not take some particular actions and be vocal about it. And the more I got involved and the more I listened to stories and interacted with survivors and became aware of the challenges out there, both policy challenges and personal challenges and everything that comes with this topic, I just felt it even more important. It gets in your blood. And it's something that I just am really dedicated and supportive of.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that because, as we discussed, having men take up this fight is really critical. I think one of the things that's important is to really acknowledge the reality of the injury and the trauma, that it is not only psychological and emotional, as you said, it affects readiness. It also, the fear of retaliation, a sense of betrayal by your own commander in some cases, and a sense of not knowing where to go to get help while you're trying to stay alive and keep the people you're with alive. It's an extraordinary amount of trauma, just, 360 for anybody who has suffered this. So I was listening to a podcast the other day of a woman that was in the Air Force, and she'd been sexually assaulted, and it took 7 years for it to really come to the point where she actually had a gun to her head and the trigger pulled, and her husband heard it and ran into the room, jumped on her and saved her. But it took that long for her to really process it, and it got worse and worse and worse. And what was really interesting is that she said that the women were not as supportive as she feels they should be when there is an assault victim. And the one who recognized it was a man. And the way the man handled it was with such tremendous respect, but he's the one that noticed that she was like a zombie. So I just want to again say how important and how critical it is that men recognize this. And also, there needs to be more support from women within the ranks for each other. So I thought that that was an interesting sort of follow-up to what you were saying too. In her case, she did not know where to go, and you have practical experience with this and knowing what could be done. Where can they go where they don't fear retaliation or losing their jobs?
Yeah, that's a tough question. The universally, whether we're talking the military or any type of other organization, but particularly an organization where there's a power differential like there is in the military. You see it also in the restaurant industry, where there's a large portion of undocumented people who are fearful to report to law enforcement because of potential implications. In the first responder community, you also see those types of challenges with power differentials, either because of the structure of the organization or the risk to those who are involved who may be fearful.
The film industry with the Me Too movement is definitely
right. Yeah.
showing that power differential.
Yeah. So you take this power differential and you take an injury that's unseen, right. And it's very difficult sometimes to know what to do with that. And there is going to be risk. I think we need to acknowledge that there's going to be risk of retaliation. Who do you report to? Who can you go to? I ran the Marine Corps' sexual assault prevention response program before I retired. I interacted daily, sometimes hourly, with the advocates who were out there in the field, with the sexual assault prevention response coordinators, the SARCs, who were out there. I worked with across the DOD with the Air Force, Army, Navy's staff members as well. And I'm very confident in suggesting to someone who is struggling to go to one of those people. They're incredibly well trained. They're very aware of how to react to this. And they're incredibly compassionate with those who come to them. And they also hold some special, the term is escaping me, but they don't have to report. Yeah, they hold a reporting situation where they can hear that report out and not have to report it to the chain of command. So they can bring solutions to bear that will help that survivor, whether they feel compelled to report it up to their chain of command or not. It's the difference between what you hear in restricted and unrestricted reporting. And so there are some people and some positions out there that can receive restricted reports. And those SARCs and those advocates out there are a critical element of this. And I'm very confident that, that those are the people who will listen and help get to solutions. I would also say that, that's a formal solution.
Right.
There are community solutions out there as well. Community solutions like rape crisis centers, in local communities, which, I've had the honor of visiting several throughout the nation in my time. Again, very compassionate, understanding people who will help guide someone through what they've experienced. I also would say, now I wouldn't necessarily walk in and direct report, but there are organizations in the community that will also, can serve as an encouragement and a help and direct to resources. RAIN, the Rape and Incest Network, they run the call center and they have support, but there are also veteran serving organizations like the one that I've been affiliated with for many years now, Protect Our Defenders, a huge advocacy organization that supports survivors. And, you may not need specifically what POD has to offer as far as legal advice or something like that, but they can point you in a direction where you might find a community connection with just one other person who is going through what you're going through and be able to get help. The Service Women Actions Network, another great nonprofit that's out there. A number of just veteran organizations. I've been associated with Team Red, White, and Blue. They're focused on health and people and purpose. And again, they're not an organization you'd walk right in the door and say, I'm suffering from trauma and I need help. You could, and they would point you to the right help, but they will connect you with other people in a community of people like you that you can become more comfortable with, so that you become more trusting of those around you and can gently and on your schedule perhaps find someone that you can discuss what you're going through with while you have built up this tribe of people who are supporting you. So just a couple of ideas.
I think that's really, those are helpful ideas for how to work with the trauma that you're suffering from. I think because it's such an epidemic, the hope is not to have to deal with the assault and the trauma, not to provide huge resources at the end of the process, but it is the mindset that is allowing this to happen. And I think I read there 83% are not even reported of the assaults that happened because of what it does to the careers and the retribution. So while I believe that those things are available and helpful, it's how do we get to the point where a female who is serving this country is gender non-specific. This is a soldier. It's not about male, female. And also in the situation of rape, it is not sexual as much as it is violent.
Right, yeah.
So I'd like to sort of address that concept of this mindset in society. Are we looking at the military and seeing this sort of as a microcosm of our culture that just can't get a grip on the fact that women are not sexual objects? Or is this power? Or is this an act of violence? Or, sort of what is at the root of this assault on women? And I don't know if that's something you can address, but I think it's certainly a part of our culture in many industries, as you said.
Yeah, Jane, this is certainly, you're hinting at the point that this is certainly not something unique to the military.
Right.
Conventional wisdom and science tells you that this issue is an issue of power, as you pointed out. It's not physical attraction. It's not orientation. It's an issue of power. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that it's a male and a female problem too.
Exactly.
Women are much higher risk, but there are a large number of males that are also suffering from assault and trauma from this, particularly
Tremendous.
And,
but 4 out of 5 of those are not reporting.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So it's even worse than what you see.
Yeah,
for sure.
And again, the whole stigma of reporting. What's the answer? It's tough. It's embedded in our society. I think, without getting too, policy driven here,
Right.
I think the more we do to integrate women and, and, and also just address, diversity issues within our ranks, whether it's male, female, whether it's racial, whatever those types of differentials are, by tearing down those types of barriers, we eliminate this idea that of these power differentials between different parts of the organization. I believe that we need to get more women and have a higher balance of women. And there's a tipping point that the closer we get to 50-50 gender balance across the uniformed services, I think we'll see some of this go away, or address it and prevent it more carefully. I think we all grow and learn, and that's why education and training is so important. And, I look back on where I was 25, 30 years ago as a young Marine officer, and, I'm embarrassed by some of my attitudes and how I treated people and what I thought about people. And I could hide behind that cloak of being so fearful of how I felt that I had to take a step to go, what? That's my past. I have learned. Now I have a different perspective. And I think those who perhaps have a history of different attitudes or anything can change. They should change. I'm an example of that. And we need to be willing to change within the ranks. And that's pointed at the leadership and the managers, if you will, of the military. You mentioned, is it a microcosm of society? Yes, it is. But no other microcosm, except for perhaps first responders, sign up for something where their very life is at risk. And so I don't accept the premise that this is just a microcosm, because the military should do better. DOD should do better. And DOD has demonstrated their ability to lead in the past on things like racial integration and other, heavy topics. Don't ask, don't tell. The world was going to fall apart when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was eliminated. And guess what? Here we sit 8 years later, and no one knows the difference. So all of these types of leading and change, and sometimes it comes slow, but the military should and can do better with the young people who are willing to sign up and commit, and and what the mothers and fathers of this nation are willing to commit to with their youth. And conversely, if we don't get this right, the mothers and fathers are going to stop sending their children to these ranks. And again, it goes into that readiness category. I think we need to build on this prevention. We need to get a better balance in our diversity. And we need to be very careful that we don't sustain an attitude that particularly women are afraid to serve in our armed forces. And that, that creates a challenge of being able to get those ratios up, right? And to get different gender-based opinions into our ranks, which has again, in my view, and several like me, having a different perspective from a gender perspective has a national security imperative, has strength.
Absolutely.
How we do that.
A situation that I had read about was a woman female who called in to say that she was really worried about going to the shooting range because the perpetrator was going with her, and she was afraid that she was going to be harmed. And the person she reached out to, who was one of who she should have called, so she did the appropriate thing. The response was, well, we'll see. We'll just see. Instead of recognizing that this was a serious concern, it wasn't handled that way. So my question is, what kind of feedback is there when you do the right thing, you report it to the right person? At what point is it logical for the victim to just give up and say, I'm walking into a situation where I'm afraid I'm going to be killed. Yeah. And in fact, there's been a situation recently in which someone was killed.
Yeah.
So I think the fear of taking the right step, and then what do you do if that step is not working and the system is broken? The idea of going outside the military as an option, what is your thought about that? Could there be dual reporting, or something where there's a follow-up from an outside agency to say, you got a report, what did you do with it? Is there any kind of tracking or something like that, or is it literally a closed room where?
No, there is an incredibly focused and dedicated reporting system and policy. No one person in the system, it seems like it sometimes, can shut down a report. Now, the problem with it is, like anywhere, people have to follow those reporting requirements, and they need to understand them, and they need to learn them, and then work with them. My experience with, particularly in the military, was that you may only see one or two of these circumstances perhaps in your time as, say, a commander. And so you're ill prepared because, you do well at what you practice. I was an aviator. I flew airplanes. And, safety is obviously a concern.
Right.
And we used to practice drills to prevent bad things from happening and to respond to things when they did happen. Unfortunately, it's a rare commander or leader who practices what ifs with their staff before something happens, like this case. Okay, let's do a drill. Let's figure out, if someone calls in, if we get notified that something has happened, in this case, in an assault or a harassment, what steps do we follow? And bring someone else in to watch what you do as you go through those steps, who could perhaps say, "Oh, stop! You didn't follow the reporting policy. You didn't do what you were supposed to." We don't train ourselves properly in drills and those type of things. I was always encouraging people to think through it that way, so the right way. And oh, by the way, typically, if you did that, you'd have one of those advocates or SARCs sitting next to you while you did this, who know that and would be able to gently say, "Hey, not the right way to do it. If you do that, you're going to have some type of a potential traumatizing effect on a survivor. You're not following the right policy, but more importantly, that decision could have led to a trickle of effects on that survivor, on the case against it." But Jane, to a point you made earlier, is if we were figuring out ways to prevent this, then we don't have to solve to that. There is always going to be a challenge in these cases of the stigma of, okay, if I report, there are vehicles that young woman could have said, "I don't want to be here, and I want what's called an expedited transfer," and they could leave the unit. But again, that's a survivor. Why does a survivor have to leave the unit?
Right.
But that is a step, if they truly feel like their life is at risk, that they should not overlook as a chance. But what does that do to the world? It announces to everyone, "I'm a survivor." There are no other circumstances in the military where someone can just immediately leave a unit and get plucked into another unit for a reason that goes unstated, because they don't publicize it. "Hey, everybody, we've got a sexual assault survivor coming to the unit." You don't do that.
No.
But it becomes a quiet, everyone knows, because it's not somebody with a special skill that we're getting ready to deploy and we had to shift them over to fill a gap. It is challenging, but there are tools. My point is, there are tools for someone who does feel like they're at risk.
The problem is, as you say, though, it's the victim or the survivor who is going to have to deal with this problem. It's not the person that, I mean, I guess my question is, where is the responsibility to really call up that person who has perpetrated this? Let them feel the problem with their rank and their position and their unit that they're leading. But it seems that that's not how it operates. It operates like the person is, the survivor is not believed.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, legally you do have to follow due process, right? So an accusation is made against someone. I saw on both sides of the fence. Arguably, I would have hoped that perpetrator or the accused perpetrator was under some type of an investigation, and those types of things. What I see is more important in that discussion, because, anytime there is an accused and a victim,
Right.
It takes time to sort out the facts. And what I see as a challenge is what happens in between while those facts are being collected. And, and that becomes less of you can't write that into policy. And I think oftentimes you can write it into policy, but to be effective at it, you have to think of it like a human being too. You
Yes.
can't be a robot. And in those cases where I think we often find shortcomings, for what I would recommend to commanders and leaders who may have to deal with this is, if you haven't taken the time to understand the problem and understand what people are going through prior to having those set of circumstances that you have to deal with now personally, you run a very high risk of handling it inappropriately. So what do I mean? So often we have leaders, just recently we've had, in congressional hearings, leaders up in front saying, we want to do better, we want to do better, we want to do better. And then a congresswoman or a congressman or a senator asks them a simple question. Have you ever talked to a survivor before? And almost universally, the answer is no. I haven't taken the time to find out about. And, I haven't taken the time to read the stories. Jane, there are stories galore.
Yeah.
It's not like you can't find a newspaper article, an advocacy group, someone who can explain circumstances, the effects of the trauma on individuals, why those individuals may be acting differently, and having a better understanding, so that if that circumstance, as you just laid out with the range, if the right leader had asked the right questions with the right level of empathy and understanding, there's no way in the world the conditions would have been presented where those two went to the rifle range together.
Right.
And handled very subtly. Just, okay, we've got these two people at odds. Why would we, that rifle ranges happen more than once,
Right.
While it's being sorted out, one could go this day and one could go that day. But what we don't do very well at all is take the time to understand, to read the stories, to pay attention, approach it from an empathetic view and a transparent understanding view. And frankly, oftentimes, because it has become such a boilerplate issue, commanders are terrified of it. They don't know what to do, so they want to stay away from it. Oh, I can't talk to someone. I might violate their trust. I might, you have to take some risks, and you have to, you have to understand their stories. But if you wait until you have a survivor coming to you to get that understanding, you're wrong. You're not going to, just like shooting a rifle, right? If you wait until you need to shoot your rifle in combat, and that's the first time you shoot it, you're going to do it poorly. That's why you train and you learn about your rifle and you learn about ballistics and you go out and you shoot and you shoot and you shoot. Well, if we're not taking the same perspective in dealing with the other things that we deal with as leaders and commanders in the in uniform and elsewhere in society, we're doing a disservice to those we serve.
Absolutely. One thing that I wondered is if there is some kind of a universal code through all branches of the military, that this is conduct unbecoming, and it is universal for every branch. We all follow the same rules. It's the same in the Marines as it is in the Air Force, and is the not only the rule book, but the consequences, are those as heavily emphasized? If you are one of the perpetrators,
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen to you. Is that enough of a threat to someone who's doing this? Or is it, boys will be boys, this horrible sort of cultural sense of nobody's going to rat me out, I'm the commander? Or, this sense of I was listening to a YouTube report today of a survivor who was saying that the person she reported it to and the perpetrator, the minute they went behind closed doors to discuss it, she said she could hear them laughing.
Yeah.
And that is devastating.
Right.
And the consequences to her and her career were enormous. So I guess I'm going back to sort of the question, how do you prevent the culture, the mindset? It's a huge question. And we have this question in society. Is it a few bad apples, or is it a culture that encourages this? Are you really trying to say, we really don't want women in the military? How does one get to this problem as a mindset for a perpetrator, whether it's a male or a female, in your training? Because the training may say, this is what we do, but how do you read that someone's a perpetrator, so that you're not reading the symptoms of the victim, you're reading the symptoms of the perpetrator? Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, to answer your initial question, Uniform Code of Military Justice, which applies to everyone in uniform, and is a law. I mean, it's a criminal, it's a criminal code. It's very clear about the offenses that we're talking about, and it's beyond conduct unbecoming. I mean, it's specifically called out in their own articles in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So there is teeth there. There is the ability to hold people accountable. It's a uniform. I mean, it's right in the name, Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Right.
The problem is typically how that is, who has a decision-making authority to pursue those charges, and as you point out, how seriously it's taken. Now, I will say we have to be careful that we don't overpaint. This isn't a majority issue, which is probably part of the problem, right? It's the numbers are horrible, taking nothing away from those who are survivors.
Really horrible, yeah.
But generally speaking, part of the challenge is the vast majority of leaders and commanders are doing things the right way, and leading units that are well organized and have good culture. It's just, it can pop up in places. If you're not paying attention to it, you can have these insidious figures underneath you that if you're not paying attention to the command. But ultimately, the real friction point right here when it comes to teeth and the law and holding people accountable is the same person who's responsible for the unit readiness and making sure that everybody is ready to do their national security mission is the same one who's applying the law. And, you have these circumstances where, they're being measured by their effectiveness. And one of those measures is whether they're having sexual assaults in their organization. So the system inherently is designed to put someone at a kind of this dilemma of, do I report it? Do I respond to it? Is it really that serious? The ethical people out there will say it doesn't matter what happens to me. But the other thing that they're faced with is their readiness requirements. Oftentimes the perpetrator, you hear it over and over again, is, oh, they were too critical to our mission. If we let them go, so we're not looking at this is from a purely legal and holding people accountable standard all the time, because there are so many other decision points. So, you know, the MJIA Act that's been pushed for many, many years in Congress that suggests to take the prosecutorial decision-making out of the hands of commanders and put them into the hands of, you know, trained attorneys,
Yes,
with a lot of friction and a lot of pushback from the military.
I can
I
imagine.
am not popular, obviously, you can assume in military circles in support of that, but I can understand the merit of that. You know, I didn't ask an attorney to go out and start a helicopter and fly it or lead a squadron of people into combat. You know, for me to make legal determinations and understanding on a really a little bit of training and not exercising those skills very often, shouldn't surprise us that the outcomes are what they are. You know, we should put those type of practices in the hands of the skilled people who can make those. And I just categorically refute the idea that it would be so detrimental to good order and discipline of units to take, you know, to put that in the hands of trained prosecutors that, and oh, by the way, that mirrors society, right? I mean, that's how we do it out
Absolutely.
in society. So, but that's not necessarily popular. It's not popular at all in military circles.
I can imagine, especially if you are adding up all the number of people who have been retaliated against. I mean, the only way to keep control of silencing someone is if you keep it in-house. So the willingness to say, no, you know what? We're good with this because we're all on the same team. It's a willingness to say, sure, you know, go ahead and look. But if your motive is, no, we can't have this get out, then that's, you know, a problem. And
that's short-sighted. I mean, that's completely short-sighted, because those same soldier, sailor, airman, Marines that are dealing with that are not combat effective, you know, from the trauma that they're dealing with. And frankly, if you nip it and stop it before it happens, and you have a culture down at your microclimate levels that prevent that and genuinely develop trust and confidence in one another, that only bolsters your readiness.
Exactly.
You know, and as a commander, one of the most disruptive things you can deal with in your unit is someone who's dealing with legal problems. You know, I mean, it distracts you from being able to do your national security mission. So anything you can do to create a culture of dignity and respect where everyone is supporting one another and prevent that. And let me tell you, the vast majority of people get that and are trying to pursue that. And just like in society, you're not going to prevent 100%, you know, but the numbers are way too high to consider this just a byproduct, you know, so it's a challenge.
I think your point too, Scott, though, is really important to recognize. This isn't just, you know, a complaint of an assault. It has so much effect on the readiness. And it's not like, okay, this act happened and it's over. This person is traumatized and their ability to perform is compromised. And that is the greater point. The greater point is you are in a situation in which you are allowing their service to be discounted, impacted, stripped away from them, and sort of considering only the actual event. And the trauma isn't the event. The trauma is what happens about how you feel. And so what's happening to the victims or the survivors as they process this is they're traumatized over and over again if they are not getting validated for, and that's why I wanted to start this out by validating, yep, this is a problem, this is a real injury, and it's not over just because someone says, oh, well, that happened 2 years ago. In the case of the woman I mentioned, it took her 7 years and she was ready
Yeah.
to kill herself.
But see, that goes back to even my point about understanding the trauma and the impact of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it can take multiple years. You can't expect
Absolutely.
someone who's suffering from trauma, whether that's post-traumatic stress from the battlefield or from a sexual trauma,
Right.
whatever the case is, going back and understanding, talking to people, reading the stories, talking to experts, understanding. We want to, you know, the military wants a cookie cutter approach, and that's understandable in their mission. But so someone who isn't in the cookie cutter pattern, someone who's suffering from trauma, and well, why didn't they just tell me? You know, why didn't they just tell me? They can trust me. You know, I take that as offense that you didn't trust me. I've said you can trust me, and I have an open door policy. You can't hold that person accountable for your hurt feelings. You have to understand that this type of trauma and these type of hidden injuries take time for people to acknowledge. Everyone deals with them differently. And, you know, I used to tell commanders all the time, you know, if you have someone who is downtown on the weekend and happens to be the victim of a drive-by shooting, and they end up in the hospital with gun wounds, you're not going to go to them immediately and start accusing them of being on the wrong street or driving in the wrong car, or, you know, you're going to deal with the wounds and the injuries that they face and give them the time they need and have compassion. Why don't we have the same compassion for those who suffer a very similar injury, a much more personal injury, but there's no open wounds to deal with, and not responding and having that awareness and building and training to an understanding really hurts you when you comes time to deal with and talk with someone who's suffering from these.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you another thing, Jane. I can assure you that someone in the ranks who is suffering, someone who's being retaliated against, they're not doing that alone. They have friends in that unit, or they have others who are observing. And what they see, how they're being treated, affects not just one person, it affects many other people in that unit when it comes to readiness and trust and confidence in one another and their ability to do their mission, but also to personally say, you know what, that Scott Jensen guy, if he's treating them like that, he's going to treat me like that. So what does that do to the trust and confidence of the whole unit? You know?
Exactly. Yeah. I was curious about when you were saying in hearing, when I gather it was an official that was supposed to be knowledgeable about all of this, had never sat down and talked to a survivor. It's astonishing to me that somebody would be so unprepared in a hearing, that they would, I mean, if for no other reason than just to protect your own reputation, that you would want to make sure that you were very familiar with the topic. And so I think that sort of speaks to exactly what we're talking about. It's like, why would that person feel so comfortable that they could just skate right through this without even knowing? And is it a situation in which, if they were to read reports or speak with somebody in person, that they would feel like, you know, this is just not my experience, and, you know, thank you for your time. How do you make that connection where it's moving from not only knowing the victim's story, but knowing, why is the perpetrator doing this?
Yeah. Well, that's a tough question, Jane. I mean, to me, my first response is, I mean, this was an inspector general of a major command addressing very recent events.
Right.
U.S. Army, very senior person. I mean, I don't know why they get caught, but I tell you what, if we started holding senior people accountable for things like that, and let people know, that I think the next person up in front of a congressional hearing would maybe just take some time to understand things better. So you know, we're just not holding people accountable the way we need to.
How do you do that, though, in the military? I think when it's so high up in the chain of command, then what? You know, how could you hold them responsible if it didn't get out, if it wasn't handled outside of the military?
Yeah. Well,
I think that's the sort of the rub of this whole thing,
yeah.
is that it can get to the top and you could follow all the rules and do everything that you've trained them to do and still have it shut down.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah, those are tough questions, probably beyond my, you know, I haven't given, it's been a while since I've thought about that, but you know, I will say this. I think that, like even myself, the leaders of 20 years ago, things are getting better, but not at the pace that they need to be. In fact, the numbers would indicate that they're not getting better in some regards. But I do think that we're developing new sets of leaders better understand. I think.
When you say understand, can I just ask, sorry to interrupt, but what is it that they're understanding? You know, are you just saying, you know, when you touch the fire, you get burned? I mean,
Yeah.
what are they understanding? Do they truly understand that the person that has been hurt this way could get them killed? I mean, does it really hit them on a personal level, or are they still sort of considering it that's that person's problem? Do they really understand that they could lose their life because of how they've traumatized someone else? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a pretty individual question, isn't it? You know, I mean.
But to your point of readiness, do they really recognize there is a direct connection?
Yeah, I think this goes to the way we train and the way we train people on what's important and what isn't important. I think there are better ways to inform and help leaders understand these issues and internalize. And to me, it's a question of internalizing it.
Yes, I think that's really a major point.
Yeah.
Is how do you get it to be like a personal, like for instance, in one interview that you did, your daughter was going into the military. And so you were thinking of her and would she be safe? And that's very personal.
Right.
So somehow I think, could there be a connection, whether it's not, you know, think of your daughter, think of your sister, you know, not even that, but think of your own life.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, I get that all the time when I'm talking to people about this who push back on me about how to deal with it and everything. And you know, people who are retired senior folks, I've spent a lot of time talking to, not recently, but in near past, talking with active duty, very senior leaders about it. And oftentimes that's an out for them, Jane, is, you know, I have a wife, I have a daughter, I have a sister. That doesn't seem to be enough to internalize.
It's not. No, I agree. I don't think it's enough.
To me,
it's like consequences if you're on the line.
Yeah.
If you yourself are on the line, then that's when
you know, it's a matter of, more broadly speaking, emotional intelligence, if you will, and vulnerability. And neither one of those two things are in real high quality when you look to develop military leaders, and particularly when you look to promote military leaders. And I think and until we perhaps include better ways of evaluating those inherent internal, and those are, I mean, that's not easy to do. I mean, you know, but
well, as we've said, it's in our whole culture.
Yeah.
It's not just in the military. It's something that is just now really but I think this this recent situation with the murder of the officer is the Me Too movement now in the military. I think that's where you're headed, but I don't know if that's going to if it's possible to do a Me Too movement in the military. I think it would be shut down. you know?
Yeah, I think we try so often to solve things through policy,
Right.
you know, and I really believe that we have to do it by changing attitudes and opinions, and that takes time. That takes more time. So we try to do
Yes.
it with policy, but clearly policy isn't solving all of those problems. It's becoming, internalizing, becoming more aware of circumstances yourself, becoming aware of your own views, opening yourself up to be challenged in those views, and being able to perhaps accept different points of view and apply that to those that you're leading in a different way. But that's the inherent challenge, is helping people understand that. And again, power differential, hyper masculine type of
Right.
environment,
Right.
people that aren't empowered, and frankly, the system is designed for them
It is.
not to be overly empowered. Those are all strikes against being
And
able
not to be emotional.
yeah.
Do you think there's an understanding of trauma, of really what trauma does to an individual? I know that trauma now is understood much more than it was several years ago.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's something that they're a part of their training, is to understand how this actually affects a person beyond just the incident itself.
Yeah, I think we're doing better at that.
That's great.
Compared to where I was a decade ago, even as as we started even the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, I guess that's more than 10 years ago. I'm showing my age. I like to feel younger than I am, but I look at the 10-year increments of when we started the war and went over to where what we started to understand about trauma, and then normalizing that to understand that is an injury. It's not a personal fault to have trauma.
Yes.
And be suffering from trauma. It's an injury to be treated and is recoverable from also. And that there can be help. Now, the challenge is normalizing that towards trauma induced from sexual assault and harassment. I think that's another step that needs to come, that we could do much better on training and informing people. But again, you see steps in the VA, in the military, towards better understanding that. But I would say, I don't know, a D plus, maybe a C on how fast we're trying to understand that, and that we could do so much better. If you think about the understanding of trauma and how people respond when they're suffering from trauma, and then apply that to the behavior within units, just that simple step alone, and taking a first step instead of saying, because you're screwed up or you're underperforming or because you're, mistreating drugs or alcohol, and you say, what's the root cause of this? A year ago, Scott was acting much better. A year ago, Jane didn't act like this. And instead of immediately assuming the bad, looking at root causes and understanding that, we could move a lot of mountains with just simple mindset changes like that, and training and understanding and those.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know you have to go. So I want to just ask one final question for you. What is your advice or your hope, or what would you like to share sort of as your end point here about your feelings? What would you advise? What hope can you give?
Give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. There is somebody out there. I have seen too many survivors who are at the end of their rope, understandably. I have also been dealing and living in this world now for many, many years. Don't give up. There is someone out there for you. You will find them. Don't give up on your health. Try to find those opportunities to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. look for people that will help you. And they may not be the obvious people. It may be someone that you meet through a service project. So get out there and engage in your community and find a purpose, help yourself find a purpose. And that may simply, Jane, be starting by, okay, protect our defenders. I'm going to just follow them on Twitter. It may just be something as simple as following something like that, and then picking up on someone that you can reach out to, taking the brave step and the hard step of reaching out to an individual and saying, can I talk to you? And understand that it doesn't have to be all at once.
Right.
All of us veterans and military people are very skeptical, internalized people to begin with, but don't give up. There is someone out there, there is an organization out there, but don't try to do it alone. We're not designed as human creatures to do things on our own. And the more we engage, the more we stay out there and trust that we're going to come across that. I mean, I wish I could just put my arms around everyone and say, keep going, keep looking, don't give up. There's someone out there for you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott, for all that you've done, all that you're doing. And it's just been great to be with you today. So thank you so much. And I look forward to following you.
Thanks, Jane. I appreciate it. And good luck to everyone out there. And I really applaud what you all are doing with this summit and the purpose of what you're behind, your intent. It's incredibly uplifting. And, you and the people that are supporting this are some of those people.
That's right.
Don't give up. There's people out there.
That's right.
And many of us will help you find them. You just got to reach out. Just micro steps. It doesn't have to be major steps, micro steps.
Wonderful. Thank
Great.
you, Scott.
Thanks, Jane.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.